All right. Good morning, good afternoon, students that now have a little bit of class time under their belts with respect to introducing time period four. Um, Welcome to just the class notes section here on introducing this time period, 1800 to 1848. We're going to really focus on a couple things here today, primarily revolving around the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. We're going to talk about his election, 1800, Jeffersonian democracy, and a early landmark Supreme Court case known as Marbury v. Madison. The election of 1800, believe it or not, is arguably the most important election in American political history. You'll recall this sets up incumbent uh, Federalist candidate John Adams against his longtime friend, Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson. Now, Adams, not too dissimilar from Alexander Hamilton, is not an incredibly likable character. You may get that sense from the John Adams miniseries, or certainly from my own personal opinion on John Adams. But personalities aside, one of the reasons, the biggest reason I think that I have my opinion on John Adams is with respect to his overreach. And what I mean by that is the Alien and Sedition Acts. Here, this constitutional republic places such value on our First Amendment, freedom of speech, and Adams basically throws that out the window with his attempt to put into place these Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien Acts being one thing, but the Sedition Acts, basically where he makes the argument, hearkening back to more like British colonial rule, that to say anything against the government is sedition, which is, of course, treason. And that's just antithetical to what we believe in this country, and it's shocking to me that so early on a president would try such a move. It was shocking, of course, to the Democratic Republicans as well. Among them, Thomas Jefferson, who had authored in secret those Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which essentially tried to mount the argument that if states don't like a federal law or action, they can nullify it. They can declare it null and void within their states. That, of course, is not the case either. But that is the primary political issue that is at play in the election of 1800. Now, the election is not only close, it's actually a tie in the Electoral College. And when that happens, it goes to the House of Representatives. Now, the House puts into place Thomas Jefferson. And that means that after two terms of Federalists, if you will, with George Washington and then John Adams, three terms, two presidents, we have a change of partisan power at the highest level of our government. And we're going to talk more about that because that is why this election is so important. But it also means that the Federalist Party has lost control of both the executive and the legislative branch, but still retains power, if you will, in the judicial branch, right? Because it was only Federalists so far who had the power to appoint judges. Adams, on his way out, tries to make another series of appointments to the judicial branch. He passes what eventually would become known as the Judicial Act of 1801. And in his midnight appointments, i.e., like appointments made on his way out the door, if you will, at midnight of his single term in office, he appoints a man by the name of William Marbury. Now, with the Democratic Republicans now in control of the executive and the legislative branches, they also try to gain control of the courts. They're trying to put all three branches under their political party's power. And so it leads to a series of events where they try to eliminate some of Adams' midnight appointees. And one of those, of course, William Marbury, is denied his original appointment to a federal court. So he sues for it. The case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. Marbury ultimately wins his commission. But most notably here is that the Supreme Court rules that part of the Judiciary Act of 1791 is actually unconstitutional. And it limits the power of the legislature, and it sets up this concept known as judicial review. I would take a quick note here to say that we're going to get into a number of Supreme Court cases that take place under the Marshall Court. That's Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice John Marshall. Now, what's notable here about this case again is this is the first time that the judicial branch exercises its constitutional power to override an action taken by another one of the branches within our tripartite government. That is to say, to declare that an action by an executive, a president, or a legislature is unconstitutional. And so, for the first time, the checks and balances that are afforded to the Supreme Court get put into play. And the Supreme Court here establishes its role forevermore in American history. It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. So the reason this is so important, Marbury v. Madison, or as my political science professor in college, God bless him, David Marion from Massachusetts used to say, Marbury v. Madison. The reason it's so important is this is the framework put into place under which all other Supreme Court rulings take place. Marbury v. Madison, Marbury, gives teeth to the judicial branch in our constitutional republic. It's an incredibly notable case, Marbury v. Madison, 1803. The concept is judicial review, and you need to know it. The thing about the election of 1800 is this. Again, it's the first time that we have a partisan change in power at the highest level of our government. And we actually get it both in the executive and the legislative branch. And a lot of Democratic Republicans, in the wake of their anger, with particular regard again to the Alien and Sedition Acts, and they attempted to circumvent that. The only recourse they had was through the states, so they attempted to circumvent the executive power with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Well, you can't do that, and they felt kind of totally disenfranchised from the system. And here they gained power in a flash, and a lot of Democratic Republicans were referring this as the revolution of 1800, that they were going to come in and make these vast sweeping changes. And Jefferson comes in, even though he's, of course, privately thrilled with his victory, he comes in very kind of restrained. And in his inaugural address, he says, "We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists." And so for the first time, as the world is watching what's going to happen to this young experiment in democracy in America, and a lot of the world is doubtful whether or not this experiment can be successful, we have this early test of, can we survive a partisan change in power? And the fact that Jefferson comes in with a reconciliatory tone here, with some restraint, is incredibly important. There's a peaceful transition of power in the election of 1800. Compare that, if you will, sorry, not sorry, to what's happening today, which hasn't happened like virtually ever. There was some brouhaha in the election of 2000. But when all was said and done, all the political parties agreed that, hey, we're going to kind of move forward. They're going to move forward with the spirit set forth in the precedent of the election of 1800. And this is the spirit that's kind of governed our transition in the White House ever since 1800. It's incredibly notable what took place here. That's not to say that Thomas Jefferson doesn't come in and make some changes, okay? As a Democratic Republican, he had always felt that the Federalists were too far reaching with their power. Remember, he even thought that King George Washington, right, was acting like a monarch. So he does, he thinks that the federal government had become too powerful, that federal expenditures had risen too much, and he does make a series of changes. He abolishes a lot of taxes, he reduces government spending, he reduces the size of the Army and the Navy. When he leaves office, he cuts the national debt nearly in half. So he absolutely makes some changes, but he also does so in kind of a moderate fashion, a style that wasn't, too controversial, wasn't too radical, and that's really what we mean when we talk about this concept of Jeffersonian democracy. We did not, in fact, witness this radical revolution of 1800. It was a peaceful and orderly transfer of power, the first in our history. And there's a lot of aspects of Federalist policy that Jefferson actually leaves in place, including the Bank of the United States, Alexander Hamilton's Bank of the United States, from his term as Secretary of the Treasury under George Washington. And so that's really notable that Jefferson goes through with this transfer of power, making some changes, of course, carrying out a lot of the wishes of his political party, but keeping in place the sound nature of our republic. His views on constitutionality will, however, come to an early test. And so we're going to talk about American expansion during this time, the Louisiana Purchase. We're going to talk about some foreign affairs real quick here. So let's get to that as well. Incredibly notable, right, is the Louisiana Purchase. When Napoleon comes to power, Spain essentially becomes like this puppet state to France. France takes much of the Spanish territory in the central region of North America, and they put pressure on Spain to close the port of New Orleans to Americans. There was a treaty, you'll remember, Pinckney's Treaty, that had granted access to that port to the United States. And so this is not a good look, right? And so Jefferson sends negotiators to France to purchase the city of New Orleans just to retain power of that port. Napoleon accepts that offer, but decides, hey, how about we throw in the entire Louisiana territory? No big deal, right? Jefferson is highly doubtful that he has the constitutional authority to make the deal. But hey, as the meme says, it's free real estate. It essentially is. It's an incredible deal. It's a vast expanse of land. It comes at an incredible price. And even being the strict constructionist, right, that Thomas Jefferson is as a Democratic Republican, he virtually has no choice but to accept this deal. It doubles the size of the United States. It comes out, you guys can look it up on yourself. It comes out something ridiculous, like, I don't know, like $61 per acre. Like, I could be exaggerating a little bit. It doesn't matter, but it's a deal that's just too good to refuse. And you can see on the map here what that Louisiana Purchase looks like in comparison to what the United States was at the time. It starts with that port of New Orleans. It goes all the way out towards the Rocky Mountains and includes all of the Mississippi River. and America is embarking on a period that we'll soon come to know as manifest destiny. From sea to shining sea, this country will belong to, well, essentially to the white man. Okay, but it starts here with the Louisiana Purchase. This is where the story of Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea come in. Jefferson puts them on commission to explore this land, to report back on its vast resources, detailed records of geography, Indian cultures that exist within this land. But the United States is kind of off and running. And it's notable that Jefferson just kind of had to say yes to this deal, even though he had some constitutional misgivings. With respect to foreign affairs, one of the things that takes place during Jefferson's time is and starts really, you'll probably, I hope, if you watched the last episode of John Adams, you'll remember at least some reference to the Barbary Pirates. They refer to the Barbary states of North Africa: Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli. And Great Britain, the United States actually like pay like bribes, tributes in exchange for the Barbary states just not attacking foreign ships. It's almost like a mob deal. The United States, like I said, Great Britain, other European nations had just kind of been paying these like mob protection fees during the 1780s and the 1790s. But Jefferson is reluctant to continue this. And so there's actually, like, during his tenure, first tenure here, there's an unofficial war between the United States and the pirates from 1801 to 1805. And then both sides agree that there's going to be no further tribute, but Jefferson does agree to pay a one-time ransom to free American prisoners seized by the Barbary pirates, and we avoid continuing war. We avoid continuing paying these tribute fees. So this is kind of Jefferson's kind of first early test with respect to foreign affairs. I suppose you could count the negotiations about the Port of New Orleans, one such test, but that's got a bigger series of ramifications from a domestic standpoint, of course. One of the reasons I bring this up is that it's incredibly notable, and I want us to understand this because, you know, we suffer, if you will, a lot of political debate today. If you're at all alive and certainly engaging on social media, and, you know, we hear this claim that, you know, the United States is founded as a Christian nation. And people who want to dispute that will often cite John Adams and the Treaty of Tripoli in 1797, where he said explicitly, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions, shall ever produce an interruption of harmony existing between the two countries, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on Christian religion. It is declared that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce war. Okay, this I think is incredibly notable and something that, quite frankly, I think is not taught enough in American history classes. We teach this kind of mythology that we are a Christian nation, and that would have been in dispute even prior to 1800. And I think it's important that we know that this is a part of what is commonly referred to, you know, as this separation of church and state that exists in the United States. Some of the other foreign affairs difficulties that Thomas Jefferson faces are with respect to trade. and with respect to the continuing conflict, of course, between France and Great Britain. Um, Jefferson continues Washington's efforts to keep America neutral in the war. Now, that's notable because we know that Thomas Jefferson himself wasn't neutral. And so, again, let's harken back real quick here to what we know about the election of 1800, where Jefferson was not kind of as much as a radical revolutionary, perhaps, as people in his own Democratic Republican Party would have wished. Um, he certainly sought for the United States to support his friends in France during the French Revolution. But once he's in power, recognizes that perhaps it's important, right, that the United States remain neutral between this war between France and Great Britain. Um, but American shipping, American trade is kind of caught in the middle. And the British begin to seize American ships and sailors. Jefferson makes a poor calculation here. He says, okay, I got an idea. To prevent this from taking place, he puts in place something known as the embargo, which prevents American ships from going to any foreign port. It essentially cuts off all foreign trade. Not a good look from an economic standpoint. Not a good idea. You can imagine if we cut off all foreign trade, it would severely cripple our economy from any number of angles, whether it be the consumer angle on imports, the manufacturer's angle on exports, just the jobs that occur within the trade and port business itself, and so on. And so Jefferson walks that back a little bit, and he puts into place what we will know as the Non-Intercourse Act, which allows trade with foreign countries except France and Great Britain, which is probably still not a great look. It will rear its ugly head because soon enough we're going to get to this. When we get into looking at like the War of 1812, spoiler alert, is coming up. But this is the Embargo Act, and then replaced by the Non-Intercourse Act is another facet that we got to keep in mind when we consider challenges that Thomas Jefferson faced from a foreign affairs perspective. So those are kind of some of the highlights, the lowlights that we consider when we generally speak of Thomas Jefferson, our third president. He's going to be succeeded by number 4, James Monroe. Thomas Jefferson is often incredibly revered in U.S. history, right? He is the founder of the University of Virginia. He stands for religious freedom. He, of course, is the author of the Declaration of Independence and an incredibly notable founding father. It's important, I think, though, that we also be willing to examine some of the tough history. And the story of Thomas Jefferson, I think, must be told, especially in the year 2020, when we're trying to reconcile a lot of modern problems with respect to race in America. We've got to reconcile the fact that the story of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson is too often ignored by the history books, and I don't want to do that today. I've got some hyperlinks on these next few slides in the Google Slides that's in our Google Drive if you're interested in taking a look at these articles. But Sally Hemings was a slave girl, bedded, if you will, by Thomas Jefferson. And it's a story, as I said, that was for far too long just ignored or glossed over by historians. Monticello, the museum dedicated to Thomas Jefferson, has recently begun this reconciliation process, as you can see in the story linked here from the New York Times. It's been a long effort, more than 25 years now, to kind of grapple with the reality of slavery from one of the most ardent and eloquent champions of freedom in American history, in Thomas Jefferson. Um, and it was kind of an open secret at the time, and again, kind of glossed over by history. But you know, the it can be no longer. So Thomas Jefferson, after his wife passed, took a young slave girl by the name of Sally Hemings into his life and into his love life. And that still might be a generous description. Consider the power dynamic, right, between a slaveholder and a young girl slave. Um, Even in dealing with this today, it's often kind of characterized as a relationship, but with that power dynamic in play, uh, how do we characterize it? Was it a relationship, or was it more like rape, which is probably the most painful view put forth, but certainly must be at least addressed. Um, Thomas Jefferson fathers a number of children of Sally Hemings, um, likely six. And This story is just one that I think it's important to not gloss over. And the reason we do so, right, is because we are busy looking at some of this tough history. When we've looked at kind of our unit map, I've talked about this great American contradiction, right? And here's Thomas Jefferson, as I said, one of the most ardent, eloquent defenders and speakers on freedom and liberty. And not only is he a slaveholder himself, but perhaps perhaps a rapist. And I don't say that lightly, but we've got to balance, right? Or at least consider the question of what extent American society fulfills the ideals upon which we claim that we are founded. So why tell this story at all? Well, the founding fathers are worthy of our study, but also our scrutiny. And if I don't tell this story, quite frankly, I don't feel like I'm doing my job. And so it's important to acknowledge this as a piece of our history. And as I said on the previous couple slides, I've linked some of the articles and some of the materials that you might be interested in looking at. Okay. Uh, so I think, as I had said at the opening of class, there's a number of resources I want you to get in today to continue kind of your opening of class notes. You're making a new section here for Unit 4, for Time Period 4. I did so in the Google Drive. I want you to get into Gilder Lehrman. I want you to look at the timeline documents, essays, that sort of thing, right? And so I would like you now to spend some time doing that. I would invite you also to get into the Jose Productions video that we talked about. It's about 15 minutes long, and it's going to introduce us to time period 4, 1800 to 1848. That's some important stuff. Check that out, and remember what our homework assignment is that I discussed with you at the beginning of class. We're going to make a top 10 timeline from 1800 to 1848. I've explained to you the free timeline maker from Adobe Spark and how to turn that in on Google Classroom prior to the beginning of school on Friday morning. Each event in your top 10 must have a title, a date, as specific as practical for each event, and the title of an APUSH theme, and the number of a key concept. Okay, I've given you a number of resources linked on that Google Classroom assignment, and I would invite you, please, to go ahead and get to that work now. Your ultimate product that you will download and submit will look something like this here. This is what the Adobe Timeline product will look like when you are done. All right, so that's all I got for you today. Get into these primary resources, get into your homework, And thank you very much, guys. I look forward to seeing you when you are live next. Take care.